Alright, spur of the moment video here. And I'm doing this because I'm sure a lot of you are aware of a lot of videos recently coming out about the 357 Magnum versus 9mm. And I'm one of those guys that a lot of my followers know that I'm really big into comparing these type of calibers. I'm into comparing calibers in general. And we keep hearing about 357 Magnum versus 9mm, and the 9mm being as good as the 357 Magnum or as powerful as. And a lot of this goes into, snub-nose revolvers versus smaller 9mm pistols, and somehow comparing them, saying that they're equal in power. And I'm sure a lot of people have been waiting for me to kind of chime in on this. I'm going to go kind of off the cuff with this because, I don't really need to script anything I'm going to say, just to bring some information to light about the differences in these cartridges. Now, the very first thing I'm going to say here is a lot of people are comparing 357 Magnum and a gun like this. This happens to be a 342 PD by Smith & Wesson, and it's a chambered in .38 Special only. But it is near identical to the 340 PD that's chambered in 357 Magnum. In fact, the only difference between this gun and the 340 PD is that this titanium cylinder is, obviously chambered for 357 Magnum, so it's bored out a little bit longer. I believe the cylinder length is identical. And the frame, on a frame like this is pretty much the same as like a 642 or anything like that, where it's an aluminum alloy. On the 340 PD, they take that aluminum alloy and they add a little bit of scandium to the frame just to strengthen it up just a little bit. And that adds about an ounce to the gun. But, this right here, 38 Special. Now, what I'm going to tell you right off the bat is the 357 Magnum was never intended to be a snub-nose caliber. From the ground up, it was meant to be a hunting cartridge. And because of that, what you often have is you have different gunpowders in 357 Magnum cartridges than what you do in 9mm. I'm going to pull up a couple of these cartridges for a reference here. They do kind of look alike. I happen to have critical duty in here. This is actually a very low-end 357 Magnum. That's why I just happen to have. And here's a 9mm critical defense. They look very similar. And if you guessed it right, the 357 is going to hold a lot more gunpowder. That's a point that I'm going to make here as well. But what I was saying is, it was designed as a cartridge for longer barrels, and there's often different kinds of gunpowder in them to provide a different burn versus a 9mm, which is designed to be burned up very quickly. But when you talk about 357 Magnum, my opinion is you need at least a 4-inch barrel or greater to really get the effectiveness of it. And you also need a gun that's going to be over 20 ounces to really maintain and manage that recoil. My personal opinion is the snub-nose revolver, and especially ones that go below 20 ounces, it's much better suited for the 38 Special cartridge. Your follow-up shot, your accuracy, everything like that's going to be a lot easier to pull off with the 38 Special. And you do lose so much energy out of a snub-nose barrel. I know there's a lot of comparisons here going back and forth, but generally speaking, the 4-inch barrel is pretty much your gold standard because law enforcement used it forever. And what you're going to get typically out of a gun like this is if you take a 125 grain bullet, full house load, that was the standard for a long time. You're going to have a 125 grain bullet doing 1,500 feet per second out of a gun like this, roughly 620 foot-pounds of energy. What happens when you put it in a 2-inch barrel or a 1.875 like this is you're going to take that, in general, on average, you're going to take that energy number and the velocity numbers from maybe 1,500 feet per second in this to maybe 1,250 in this. You're going to bring your foot-pounds energy from 600 down to 400 foot-pounds. And that's where they get the idea that the 9mm is going to be just as effective. Because if I were to shoot one of those, industry standard 357s like I was talking with, the 125 grain bullet out of this and get 400 foot-pounds, and then I were going to shoot a plus P9mm out of this 4-inch barrel, comparing these two right here, I could get 400 foot-pounds energy out of both of these, and that's pretty acceptable. However, when you take a 9mm and you put it in a 3-inch barrel, like some compact ones, you definitely lose a lot of energy. Rather than getting your, let's say, 1200 feet per second out of a gun like this, you might get 1050, something like that. So it's going to be kind of a little bit closer to 38 special range when we get down into the smaller guns anyways. So that's something to take into consideration. Now, a lot of people don't know what the original Magnum was designed for. It was designed to be a hunting cartridge, and it was designed out of an 8-inch barrel, 8 3/8 inch barrel. And the original loading, the Elmer Keith in, I believe it was Remington. I always get these mixed up. Is it the 357 Remington or is it the 357, yeah, I think it's Remington. Remington Magnum. No, that's the 44. Anyways, you know what I'm trying to say here. The original loading, the Elmer Keith and that original company came up with, was a 158 grain bullet, semi-jacketed soft point, doing 1500 feet per second out of an 8-inch barrel. If you were to put that original loading through this 4-inch barrel, you'd probably see somewhere around 1350 to 1400 feet per second. You would still see roughly 600 foot-pounds of energy out of a gun like this. And that's really your standard. When we look at a 4-inch barrel, 600 foot-pounds is what you can expect out of a gun like this. Now, if you're going to shoot a Buffalo Bore 125 grain, you're going to get more like 1600 feet per second out of this, somewhere in the 700 foot-pounds range. And that just blows the 9mm out of the water. You know, some people like to say, well, the 9mm plus P plus, but we got to remember when we get into that, we're getting into companies that are making cartridges that are not under SAMI specs, and SAMI specs are out there for a good reason, and mainly to protect older firearms from excessive pressure. But 9mm plus P plus really is pushing it, and when you take a semi-automatic cartridge and you try to push it up really hot, everything's going to take a toll on your gun. The recoil is going to mess up, well, not necessarily mess up, but it's going to put more wear and tear on your gun. It's going to put more wear and tear on the mainspring, and all of that may not function properly, as where hot 357 Magnum's not going to make a difference here. And another thing to keep in mind is that when we use cartridges that I would say are acceptable, and that would be about 400 foot-pounds energy out of a 4-inch or even a 5-inch barrel, just your standard 9mm plus P, and not plus P plus. What we're really going to look at when we compare 9mm versus 357 Magnum in their appropriate platforms is 400 foot-pounds versus 600 foot-pounds. What we're going to look at is you know, a 115 bullet doing around 1200, or I'll say a 124 grain bullet even, 124 doing 1200 versus a 125 doing 1500. And that's just in handguns here. Now if we look at the maximum potential of the cartridge, this is where you can really see a big difference here. If you were to take one of those 124 plus P 9mm and shoot it through a gun like this, or even a 5-inch barrel, you're roughly going to get that 1200 feet per second. You take it and you put it in a rifle length barrel, what you're going to get is less than 1400 often. You're going to get maybe about a 150 feet per second gain on a 9mm. Now you take a 357 Magnum, one of these full house loads, and you put it through this. Not only does your velocity out of this gun beat a 9mm out of a rifle, but when you put the 357 in a rifle, not only does it initially beat it, but you don't get 150 feet per second gain on a, let's say, an 18-inch rifle barrel. You get about a 300 feet per second gain. So what that's going to come out to is a 9mm cartridge in a rifle, plus P even. 124 grain, you're going to do 1400 feet per second if you're lucky. 357 Magnum, the same weight bullet, roughly, you're going to get close to 1,800 feet per second, or 400 feet per second gain, with roughly the same bullet weight. That's substantial. That's putting the 357 Magnum up there around 1,000 foot-pounds of energy or so. Pretty close to it anyways. I don't have a calculator in front of me to figure that out. It's a pretty substantial difference between the 357 Magnum and the 9mm. And when we look at these cartridges, I'm going to sum it up. You know, look at how much gunpowder these will hold. It's a significant difference, and they're both running at 35,000 psi. So if you have almost double the gunpowder and you're running at the same pressure, do we really have to take it to any other explanation as to why it's more powerful? 35,000 psi, 35,000 psi, nearly double the gunpowder. That's pretty simple math. So, can we get a low-end 357 Magnum out of a gun like this to match a high-end 9mm out of a gun like this? Yes. Guns aside, can you compare these cartridges? No, you can't. You cannot. You're almost double the power with the 357 Magnum per shot. And I know people are going to get into that argument. Whoa, no way I can shoot 15 rounds versus you only got 6, so therefore my onboard power is more. Well, when it comes to potential lethal power, yeah, that's true. 2 shots of 9mm is probably more lethal than 1 shot of 357 Magnum. However, that does not equate to more stopping power. If this has, and I know people like to argue about stopping power, I do believe it's a thing. If it wasn't a thing, a 22 and a 500 Magnum would fare the same. But let's say stopping power here. If this is going to be, let's say somewhere around 80% one-shot stopping power, you know, this is still going to be close to 100. You know, 96% is what the rated law enforcement data is on it. So 2 80% one-shot stops is still 80%, and your second chance is still 80%, and your third chance is still 80%. It doesn't equal out to 160% and 240%. Your one-shot stop, where the stopping power numbers come from, is still going to be higher with the 357 Magnum. And not only that, but when you stretch out the distances with these cartridges, you're going to be more accurate with the 357 Magnum. So, you know, enough of that. That's just a comparison. That's just running some numbers by you. So, thought I would kind of put my hand in this and talk about it. So, as always, comment, share, and like, and tell me what you think. And thanks for watching.